Blood is thicker than water, they always say. But I learned the hard way that blood can also drain your bank account dry while smiling right to your face. It took one Facebook post, a $50,000 lie, and a single click on my banking app to burn my family tree to ashes. My name is Leora. If you had asked me 5 years ago what my biggest flaw was, I would have told you I worked too much. If you asked me today, I'd tell you my biggest flaw was believing my mother, Diane, ever actually loved me as much as she loved my younger sister, Brittany. Growing up in a modest house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, the family dynamic was established early and enforced ruthlessly. Brittany was the golden child, the cheerleader, the pageant winner, the girl who could do no wrong. I was the workhorse. While Brittany was getting her hair professionally blown out for high school dances, I was working double shifts at a local diner to pay for my own SAT prep books. My mother always justified it by saying, "Brittany needs a little extra help, Leora. You're so independent, you can figure things out on your own." And figure it out I did. I moved to Chicago, clawed my way through a finance degree, and by the time I was 32, I was a senior director at a wealth management firm. I had a beautiful condo overlooking Lake Michigan, a robust investment portfolio, and a life I had built entirely with my own two hands. Brittany, meanwhile, had coasted. At 29, she was still living in our mother's house, working part-time as a receptionist at a tanning salon, and spending her days curating a fake luxury lifestyle on Instagram. She had been engaged to a guy named Travis for 3 years. Travis was an entrepreneur, which is Midwestern code for a guy who refuses to get a 9-to-5 job and constantly loses money in crypto scams. Despite the distance and the blatant favoritism, I loved my family. I was the one who paid for the new water heater when Mom's broke. I was the one who quietly slipped Brittany a few $100 when she couldn't make her car payment. I thought I was being a good daughter and a supportive sister. I didn't realize I was just the family ATM. The real deception started in October. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice trembling, accompanied by the muffled sound of sobbing. "Leora, honey, I didn't want to worry you," she choked out. "But the doctors, they found something." My heart plummeted. "Mom? Found what? What's going on?" She spun a masterful, terrifying web. She claimed she had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive autoimmune disorder that was severely damaging her liver. She told me her standard health insurance wasn't going to cover the experimental treatments she desperately needed at a specialized clinic in Cleveland. She painted a picture of herself wasting away, crying about how she just wanted to live long enough to see Brittany finally get married at the local courthouse next spring. "How much, Mom?" I asked, my voice tight with panic. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." "They need a massive deposit, Leora. Almost $40,000 over the next few months. I don't have it. I'm going to lose my house. Or I'm going to lose my life." I didn't even hesitate. That's the thing about familial love, it weaponizes your empathy. I told her I would take care of it. Because the medical bills were going to be rolling, and I traveled constantly for work, I decided the most efficient way to handle it was to add her as an authorized user to my high-limit Platinum American Express card. "Listen to me carefully, Mom," I told her the day the physical card arrived at her house. "This card has an incredibly high limit, but I pay it off in full every month. This is strictly for your medical bills. The clinic, the specialists, the pharmacy. Nothing else. Do you understand?" "Oh, Leora, God bless you," she wept into the phone. "You're saving my life. I promise. Only the hospital. I'll keep every receipt." For the first 4 months, everything seemed normal. I saw charges rolling in from businesses with vague, clinical-sounding names: Crescent Valley Care, Lakeside Diagnostics, Premier Health Services. The bills were steep: 5,000 here, 8,000 there, but my mother's tearful phone calls about how much the treatments were helping her kept me from digging too deeply. I just paid the balance. I was exhausted from work, but I felt a deep, profound sense of pride that I could keep my mother alive. Whenever I asked about Brittany's wedding, Mom would sigh. "Oh, poor Brittany, she and Travis are just going to go to the Justice of the Peace in May." We have no money for a real wedding now because of my illness. It breaks my heart, but she's being so brave about it. I felt so guilty about their sacrifices that I even sent Brittany a separate $2,000 check as an early wedding gift, telling her to buy a nice dress for the courthouse. I had no idea I was funding my own emotional execution. It was late April, just 2 weeks before Brittany's supposed courthouse wedding. I had just wrapped up a brutal 70-hour work week closing a merger. It was a Friday night. I was sitting on my velvet sofa in Chicago, nursing a glass of Cabernet and mindlessly scrolling through Facebook to decompress. I rarely use the app anymore, mostly keeping it to check in on extended family. I refreshed my feed, and a massive photo album popped up at the very top. It was posted by my cousin, Sarah, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. The album was titled, "Aloha to the Happy Couple, Epic Welcome Party for Brittany and Travis." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. Aloha? Welcome party? I tapped the album. The first photo loaded, and the breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. It was a professional, high-resolution photograph taken on a pristine, white sand beach. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean. In the center of the frame stood my sister, Brittany, wearing a custom, beaded designer gown that easily cost 10 grand. Next to her was Travis, wearing a bespoke linen suit, holding a massive bottle of Dom Perignon. But it was the background that made my blood run cold. Behind them was a massive, lavishly decorated private cabana. There were overflowing floral arrangements of rare orchids, a live Hawaiian band, and standing there, laughing uproariously, with a cocktail in her hand, looking healthier and more vibrant than she had in a decade, was my mother, Diane. The woman who was supposedly bedridden in Columbus, suffering from liver failure. My hands began to shake as I swiped to the next photo. It was a group shot. There were at least 50 people there, Travis's entire deadbeat family, a dozen of Brittany's sorority sisters, aunts and uncles on my mother's side. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. Then, I saw the caption Brittany had added to a shared post, which Sarah had tagged. "I am in tears. The most magical rehearsal dinner at the Four Seasons Maui." A massive, gigantic shout-out to my incredible, generous, amazing mother, Diane, who surprised us by funding this $80,000 dream destination wedding week. "Mom, you are my hero. Number spoiled bride, number Maui matrimony number, sorry not sorry." I stared at the words until they blurred. Funding this $80,000 dream destination wedding. My mother worked as a part-time substitute teacher. She didn't have $80,000. She didn't have $8,000. A sickening realization crawled up my throat, tasting like bile. I threw my phone onto the coffee table and sprinted to my laptop. My hands were trembling so violently, I mistyped my password 3 times before finally logging into my American Express portal. I bypassed the summary dashboard and clicked straight into the detailed transaction history. I hadn't scrutinized the specific merchant codes in months, relying on the surface-level names. Now, I clicked on the merchant details for the charges from the past 4 months. Crescent Valley Care wasn't a clinic. When I pulled up the merchant ID, it was the parent company for a luxury bridal boutique in Chicago. Lakeside Diagnostics was a shell LLC for a premier destination wedding planner. Premier Health Services was the corporate billing name for a high-end travel agency that chartered private flights and luxury villas. The numbers blurred together. $12,500 for the florist. $15,000 for first-class flights to Hawaii for Travis's family. $4,000 for a private catamaran sunset cruise. My mother wasn't dying. There was no autoimmune disease. There was no clinic in Cleveland. Every single tear, every desperate phone call, every guilt trip about her failing health had been a calculated, sociopathic lie designed to trick me into handing over my limitless credit card so she could buy Brittany the wedding of the century. And they didn't even have the decency to invite me. They left me in Chicago to work myself into the ground to pay off the debt of the party they were currently throwing. I sat in the glow of my laptop screen, the silence of my apartment ringing in my ears. The betrayal was so profound, so entirely absolute, that I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. It was the absolute death of my family, happening right there in my living room. I looked at the clock. It was 9 p.m. in Chicago. Right about the time vendors would be running the final authorizations for the wedding day itself, which was likely tomorrow. I looked back at the Amex dashboard. There was a pending authorization hold for $22,000 from the Four Seasons Maui for the final reception balance and catering. It hadn't cleared yet. It was sitting in pending status. A slow, dark smile crept onto my face. I clicked the tab labeled Card Management. I selected my mother's authorized user card. Action, lock card. Reason for locking, suspected fraud, stolen. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed with a green check mark. Card ending in 4091 is now locked. But I wasn't done. I picked up my phone. I went into my contacts. Mom. Block contact. Brittany. Block contact. Travis. Block contact. I blocked my Aunt Susan. I blocked my cousin Sarah. I went onto Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and I systematically blocked every single family member who is currently standing on that beach drinking champagne on my dime. I locked the financial gates, and I severed the communication bridges. They were now stranded on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, $50,000 in debt to a five-star resort, with a massive wedding scheduled for the next day, and a piece of plastic in my mother's purse that was now as useful as a piece of garbage. I poured myself another glass of Cabernet, walked over to my window, and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The storm was about to hit Maui, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to watch them drown in it. In the end, walking away was the hardest but most liberating choice I ever made. Their deceit cost me money, but it bought me absolute freedom. Brittany's marriage crumbled under the weight of the fraud, and my mother learned that unconditional support requires unconditional respect. You can't bite the hand that feeds you and expect a feast. Eventually, the table is cleared, and you're left entirely alone. Saturday morning in Chicago was usually a time for me to catch up on sleep, but I woke up at 6 a.m., feeling lighter than I had in years. The chronic, heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for the past 6 months, the one born of watching my mother supposedly waste away from a terminal illness, was gone. In its place was a cold, hyper-focused clarity. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. I didn't open my work emails. I didn't check the stock futures. I opened my American Express app and watched the show begin. Because Maui is 5 hours behind Chicago, I knew the vendors wouldn't start trying to run their day of balances until mid-morning my time. At exactly 9:15 a.m. CST, the first notification pinged on my screen. Transaction declined, $1,850 at Maui Glamour Artistry. I took a slow sip of my coffee. That would be Brittany's hair and makeup team. I pictured them in the extravagant bridal suite, their flat irons and airbrush guns whirring, suddenly pausing as the payment terminal beeped a harsh, unforgiving red. 10 minutes later, another ping. Transaction declined. $4,200 at Pacific Breeze Florals. Then, the big one. The one I had been waiting for. Transaction declined. $22,450 at Four Seasons Resort Maui, catering and events. The financial firewall I had erected was holding strong. My phone remained completely silent because I had blocked their numbers, but I knew my mother well enough to know she wouldn't just give up. She was a master manipulator, and she would find another angle. Sure enough, at 10:30 a.m., my corporate email inbox chimed. I had neglected to block them on my work email, mostly because they rarely used it. Now, it was their only lifeline. The first email was from my mother. The subject line was blank. Leora, honey, I think there's a glitch with the hospital card. I'm at the pharmacy picking up my anti-rejection meds, and it's declining. Please call me the second you get this. I'm starting to feel dizzy. Love, Mom. The audacity of it actually made me laugh out loud. She was standing in the lobby of a 5-star Hawaiian resort, likely wearing a silk caftan, staring down an angry event coordinator, and she was still playing the dying mother card. She thought I was oblivious. She thought I was just sitting in Chicago, fretting over her failing liver. I didn't reply. I just dragged the email into a new folder I titled Fraud Documentation. 20 minutes later, a second email arrived. This one from Brittany. Subject: Emergency. Urgent. Leora, what the hell is wrong with your card? Mom said you gave her a card for emergencies, and she's trying to pay my makeup artist, and it's declining. I am literally half contoured, and the artists are threatening to walk out. Unfreeze the card now. Mom is having a panic attack. So, that was the spin. Diane had told Brittany that I had generously provided a backup credit card for wedding emergencies. She hadn't admitted to Brittany that every single cent of the $80,000 extravaganza was stolen from me under the guise of medical treatments. I sat back and thought about my next move. I could reply. I could scream. I could send them the screenshot of their own Facebook post. But I knew that arguing with narcissists is a losing game. The only way to win is to remove yourself from the board entirely. Instead of replying to my sister, I drafted an email to Jason Sterling, a ruthless, brilliant corporate attorney I kept on retainer for my real estate investments. Jason, I wrote, I need to schedule an urgent call on Monday. I have evidence that my mother has committed wire fraud and theft by deception, defrauding me of approximately $55,000 over the past 4 months by fabricating a terminal illness to gain access to my credit accounts. She has used the funds to finance a luxury destination wedding in Hawaii. I want to dispute every single non-medical charge with American Express as fraud, and I want to know my options for pressing formal charges. I have her medical claims in writing. Jason replied 3 minutes later from his iPhone. Jesus. Leora. Consider it done. Call me at 9 a.m. Monday. Do not communicate with them. Let them burn. I closed my laptop, put on my running shoes, and went for a 5-mile run along the lakefront. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's expectations on my shoulders. I was letting gravity do its work. I pieced together the exact events of that afternoon in Maui weeks later, mostly through the frantic, furious voicemails left on my work phone by extended family members, and the eventual, humiliating public fallout on social media. It was a spectacular, slow-motion train wreck. By 1 p.m. Hawaiian time, the situation in the bridal suite had deteriorated from mild annoyance to absolute, unmitigated panic. Jonathan Hayes, the director of special events for the resort, was a man who catered to billionaires and celebrities. He was polite, professional, and entirely uncompromising. According to what my cousin Sarah later screamed into my voicemail, Jonathan had knocked on the door of the bridal suite, bypassing the bridesmaids to speak directly to my mother. Mrs. Miller, Jonathan had said, his voice a smooth, calm baritone that betrayed no emotion. I apologize for the intrusion, but the final authorization for the ballroom, the catering staff, and the open bar has been declined by your financial institution. As per our contract, we cannot allow the vendors to proceed with the setup, nor can we open the reception doors at 5 o'clock until the balance of $22,450 is settled. My mother, backed into a corner, tried to play the indignant millionaire. There must be a mistake. Run it again. My daughter's bank is just being overly cautious because we are traveling. We have run it 3 times, ma'am. The issuing bank has placed a hard lock on the account, citing suspected fraud. Do you have an alternative method of payment? A different card? Or perhaps we can initiate a direct wire transfer? The silence in the room must have been deafening. My mother, Diane, who had built her entire persona on being the generous, wealthy matriarch of this trip, suddenly had nothing but an empty purse. I need to make a phone call, she stammered, her face draining of color. She retreated to the bathroom, desperately trying to call me again, oblivious to the fact that she was permanently blocked. When she emerged, she looked like a cornered animal. The glamorous facade was cracking. Brittany, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, dropped her mimosa. Mom? What's going on? Tell him to run it again. The florist is literally downstairs waiting to install the floral arch on the beach. It was at this precise moment that Travis walked into the suite. Travis, the groom, who had spent the last 3 days ordering top-shelf tequila to his poolside cabana under the assumption that his future mother-in-law was footing the bill. "Hey," Travis said, looking annoyed. "The bartender at the cabana just told me my room tab is cut off. What's the deal?" The truth, which had been stretched so thin it was transparent, finally shattered. My mother broke down into hysterical, ugly tears. "The card is locked," she wailed, collapsing onto the velvet chaise lounge. "Leora locked the card. She won't answer her phone. We don't have the money." Travis stopped dead in his tracks. "Wait. What do you mean? Leora locked the card? I thought you paid for this, Diane. You said you cashed in an annuity." "I didn't have an annuity," my mother shrieked. "Leora gave me her platinum card for my medical bills. I reallocated the funds. She was supposed to pay for this. She owes us this." The betrayal wasn't just hitting me in Chicago, it was exploding like a grenade in that Maui bridal suite. Brittany stared at her mother in sheer horror. Not because her mother was a liar, but because the money had dried up. "You paid for my wedding with a stolen credit card?" Brittany screamed, her half-finished makeup making her look unhinged. "Are you insane? The wedding is in 3 hours. Pay the man, Travis." Travis took a step back, holding up his hands. "Whoa, whoa, don't look at me. I have $300 in my checking account. My crypto portfolio is down 40%. I can't drop 22 grand today." The room erupted into chaos. Jonathan Hayes quietly cleared his throat. "I understand this is a difficult family matter. However, the resort is a business. If the balance is not paid in full by 3 p.m., I will be forced to instruct my staff to break down the reception space. Furthermore, the outstanding balance for the rooms and cabanas currently sits at $14,000. That will need to be settled upon checkout." By 4 p.m. Chicago time, my work phone finally rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a local Maui area code. I assumed it was the hotel calling to verify the fraud alert, so I picked it up. "Hello? Leora? Leora, is that you?" It was my Aunt Susan. She sounded completely out of breath, yelling over the sound of wind and crashing waves. "Aunt Susan," I said, my voice eerily calm, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Leora, what the hell is wrong with you?" she shrieked. "Your mother is having a nervous breakdown in the lobby. The hotel just locked the doors to the Sunset Ballroom. They took away the prime rib. Your sister is sitting on the floor of her hotel room in her wedding dress, sobbing because the ceremony is canceled. How could you be so selfish and ruin your sister's big day?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Aunt Susan, let me ask you a question. How exactly did Mom tell you she was paying for this $80,000 vacation? She told us she inherited money from Great-Uncle Arthur's estate. What does that matter? You're a millionaire, Leora. Stop being a petty bitch and fix this." "Great-Uncle Arthur died penniless in a state facility 10 years ago, Susan," I said softly. "Mom didn't inherit anything. 4 months ago, she called me sobbing. She told me she had a rare, terminal, autoimmune disease. She told me she was in liver failure and needed me to finance experimental treatments at a clinic in Cleveland to save her life. I gave her my credit card to keep her alive." The line went dead silent. The wind howling in the background was the only sound. "She... what?" Susan whispered. "She lied to me, Susan. She faked a terminal illness to steal $50,000 from me to pay for a party she didn't invite me to. So no, I won't be unlocking the card. In fact, I've already spoken to my attorney. I'm reporting every single charge as wire fraud. If I were you, I'd pack my bags. I have a feeling the Four Seasons is about to start evicting people." "Leora, oh my God. We thought..." She said she had a doctor's appointment back in November, but she said she was totally fine. "She's fine, Susan. But she is entirely, permanently broke, and she no longer has a daughter named Leora. Have a safe flight home." I hung up the phone. I didn't block the Maui hotel number. I just turned my work phone off and placed it in my desk drawer. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, the ultimate karma was unfolding on the pristine beaches of Hawaii. Without the final payment, the Four Seasons didn't just cancel the reception, they canceled the ceremony space. The floral arches were dismantled. The string quartet packed up their instruments and left. Travis, realizing he wasn't marrying into a secret family fortune and facing a massive hotel bill he couldn't pay, packed his bespoke linen suit into his duffel bag, walked out of the resort, and took a taxi to the airport, leaving Brittany at the altar before she even made it down the aisle. The guests, 50 of my extended family members and Brittany's friends, were left stranded in the lobby. The resort management, realizing the primary card on file for the entire block of rooms was locked for fraud, demanded immediate payment from the individual guests for their rooms. My mother, entirely exposed as a fraud and a thief in front of her entire family, had to sit in the lobby and watch as her sisters, cousins, and friends turned on her, screaming at her for dragging them across the ocean on a foundation of lies. The house of cards hadn't just collapsed, it had burned to the ground. And I hadn't even had to strike the match. I just stopped paying the water bill to put it out. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, biting wind off Lake Michigan, but inside the mahogany-paneled conference room of Jason Sterling's downtown Chicago law firm, the atmosphere was strictly business. I sat across from Jason, a notoriously ruthless litigator, and placed a thick manila folder on the glass table. Inside was the entire anatomy of my mother's betrayal. The printed emails crying about her failing liver, the false invoices from the Shell LLCs, the staggering American Express statements, and a color-printed stack of Sarah's Facebook photos from the Four Seasons Maui. Jason adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents in complete silence. When he reached the photograph of my mother holding a glass of Dom Perignon on the beach, a sharp, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "I've seen corporate embezzlement cases with less audacity than this, Leora," Jason said, leaning back in his leather chair. "She didn't just borrow your card, she orchestrated a multi-state wire fraud scheme, utilizing interstate communication to defraud you of over $55,000 under the explicit, documented guise of a medical emergency. This isn't a family dispute, this is a felony." That afternoon, under Jason's guidance, I didn't just call American Express. We conferenced in their elite fraud investigations unit, speaking directly to a senior investigator named Miss Higgins. We provided the signed affidavits, the proof of the fake medical clinics, and the geographic data proving I was in Illinois while the card was being swiped for luxury catamarans in Hawaii. Because I had explicitly restricted the authorized user terms in writing to medical expenses only, Amex immediately flagged the entire Maui venture as unauthorized, fraudulent spending. But the true anvil dropped on Tuesday when Jason and I walked into the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division to meet with Detective Aaron Bradley. Detective Bradley was a no-nonsense veteran who had spent 20 years chasing down white-collar criminals. He took one look at the file, listened to the voicemail Aunt Susan had left me, and slowly shook his head. "Family or not, Miss Miller," she crossed a massive legal line. "Since the financial damages exceed the felony threshold and involve electronic banking across state lines, we're looking at grand theft by deception and wire fraud. I'll be reaching out to the authorities in Columbus to pay her a visit." While the legal avalanche was gaining momentum in Chicago, the social and financial destruction in Maui had reached apocalyptic levels. I later learned the full, pathetic details from my cousin Sarah, who showed up unannounced at my condo building 2 weeks later, begging for forgiveness. According to Sarah, the hotel management, led by the uncompromising Jonathan Hayes, had locked my mother and Brittany out of their luxury suites until the outstanding room balances were settled. My mother, completely destitute, had to beg her own sisters to pool their credit cards just to pay the $14,000 lodging and cabana tab so they could retrieve their luggage. Travis was gone. He had officially ghosted Brittany, turning his phone off and flying back to Ohio on his parents' dime. Brittany was left standing in the lobby in a sweatpants and designer heels combo, sobbing uncontrollably as the entire extended family turned their backs on them. Because they had originally booked first-class tickets on my Amex tickets that were now flagged for fraud and canceled by the airline, my mother and sister spent 3 agonizing days sleeping on the floor of the Kahului airport terminal, desperately trying to fly standby on budget airlines to get back to the mainland. When Diane finally set foot in her Columbus home, the nightmare was only just beginning. 2 days after she unpacked her bags, there was a knock on her door. It wasn't a neighbor checking in. It was 2 officers from the Columbus Police Department, acting on the warrant initiated by Detective Bradley in Chicago. They didn't drag her out in handcuffs, but they served her with a formal summons to appear in court for felony fraud. The panic was absolute. My mother finally realized that her tears, her guilt trips, and her emotional manipulation held zero currency in the criminal justice system. She tried to call me. She tried to use burner phones. She even had her local pastor email me, pleading for grace and family forgiveness. I forwarded every single correspondence directly to Jason Sterling, who responded with a cease and desist order that threatened a restraining order if she attempted to contact me again. The American Express Fraud Department didn't absorb the $55,000 loss, either. Because my mother was the one who physically signed the receipts at the bridal boutiques and travel agencies, Amex aggressively pursued her for the funds. 7 months later, I sat in the back of a sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom in Cook County. I wore a tailored Navy suit and felt absolutely nothing. My mother sat at the defense table. The vibrant, laughing woman from the Maui photographs was entirely gone. She looked 10 years older, her hair unkempt, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Brittany wasn't even there to support her. She was too busy working double shifts at a regional logistics warehouse to pay off the personal loans she had taken out to cover the Maui hotel bill that my aunts had forced her to repay. Judge Harrison, a stern man with zero tolerance for excuses, looked down from the bench. Because my mother was a first-time offender and the jails were overcrowded, Jason had negotiated a plea deal on my behalf. I didn't want her behind bars. I wanted her legally and financially neutralized. Diane Miller, Judge Harrison's voice echoed through the quiet courtroom. The sheer calculated malice of faking a terminal illness to steal from your own daughter is staggering. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and you are ordered to pay full restitution to the victim, Leora Miller, in the amount of $55,420, alongside all associated legal fees. To pay the court-ordered restitution and the aggressive collection agencies from American Express, my mother was forced to sell the family home in Columbus, the house where I had grown up, the house where she had systematically favored my sister for 3 decades. She had to move into a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, taking a job as a cashier at a local pharmacy just to make her monthly court payments. As for me, the day the first restitution check cleared into my bank account, I didn't save it. I didn't invest it. I decided to spend it on the one thing they had tried to steal from me: a journey. But I didn't want a tropical beach. I didn't want the warmth of the sun or the fake smiles of a resort staff. I wanted a place that matched the absolute, unyielding coldness I had finally embraced to protect myself. I wanted a place where survival relied on sheer grit and independence, away from the toxic warmth of a family that only wanted to burn me alive. I packed a single heavy duffel bag, left my phone on my kitchen counter, and boarded a flight to Yakutia, Siberia. Standing out on the frozen tundra, miles away from civilization, in the absolute coldest inhabited place on Earth, I breathed in the sharp, icy air. The temperature was 50 below zero. A deep, penetrating chill that froze the moisture in your lungs if you breathed too fast. The landscape was brutal, desolate, and entirely unforgiving. And as I watched the pale sun reflect off the endless miles of ice, completely isolated from the noise, the greed, and the manipulation, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I felt perfectly warm. In the end, walking away was the hardest, yet most liberating choice I ever made. Their deceit cost me a fortune, but it bought my absolute freedom. Brittany's fake marriage crumbled under the weight of her own fraud, and my mother learned that unconditional support requires unconditional respect. You simply cannot bite the hand that feeds you and expect a feast. Eventually, the table is cleared, leaving you entirely alone.